Thanks so much for coming to join my session. Even if it is just an excuse to sit down halfway through the day, I can let that go. Anyway, my name is Liz Stanley. I'm the Engagement Marketing Strategist for UBM. So UBM is a global events and exhibitions business. We've actually put TFM&A on today, so this is what we do. I don't want you to be fooled by the fact that there's marketing in my job title. Before January, it wasn't there, and I've never been a marketer. I haven't worked in the marketing department, but I have worked with marketing teams, and what I'm really interested in is digital disruption and how social media is changing the way that we need to market to our communities. So I'm not going to be talking to you about social media from a traditional marketing perspective. I don't see this as being just another channel that we push stuff out through. What I see social media as being is an undeniable cultural shift which disrupts everything about what we do and the way that we communicate with our communities. And there's going to be huge opportunities out there for companies who get this right, and potential pitfalls for those of us who don't. So social media is not exactly a new thing. People have been communicating with each other for a really, really long period of time. It's just that we're starting to see it now more in a digital sense. So if you think about those platforms that we're working with, they're not exactly new either. LinkedIn launched in 2003, Facebook 2004, and Twitter was 2006. So if you combine this increased connectivity that people have with each other on these platforms, with the explosion in connected devices such as smartphones and tablets, we're obviously really kind of already navigating uncharted marketing territory. But what we're only starting to just realise, or maybe even admit to ourselves, is that this is having a really profound impact on the way that we need to be doing marketing. So this lovely visualisation from McKinsey shows us what the consumer decision funnel used to look like. So it starts with, a lot of brands at the beginning, and then logically they reduce them down to the one that they're going to use. But this is a really linear and simplistic way of looking at how human beings make decisions. And surely we must have known, probably in the back of our minds somewhere, that actually the funnel could never have been that simple. But while the flow of information was one way, and we were pushing information out through those channels onto our audiences, it was kind of okay to fool ourselves into believing that things actually were this simple. Because after all, who was going to tell us otherwise? But all of a sudden, we've kind of come to realise that actually there's a whole lot more kind of stuff going on in the way that consumers make decisions about what they're going to purchase. And it's not like it wasn't like this before, but all of a sudden we can actually see people telling us how they're making decisions, whether that's on social networks, whether it's on forums, review sites, or even on our own website. We can actually see this information. And it kind of begs the question, who's actually in control here? So this increased connectivity that people have with one another has led to a massive democratization of information. And by that, I mean that people don't just have to take our word for it about our products anymore. They can actually hear what other people want to say about it and actually make decisions about products and services before they've even actually thought about buying them. And whilst our communities have become much more savvy in marketing, they've also become much more sceptical. But while they have been kind of keeping up with the curve, a lot of us have kind of fallen into the trap of using social media in the same way that we would have used old media. And this has led to a lot of high-profile social media fails. So this is HMV. At the beginning of 2013, HMV had a bit of a short, sharp social media lesson when their social media planner, Poppy, took to their account to live tweet from a mass redundancy meeting. What was really, really worrying about this was that it soon became incredibly apparent that senior management within the business didn't actually know very much about their Twitter account or even how to access their own branded channel. So after the plug was finally pulled on Poppy, she took to her own Twitter account to let everybody know what had happened. And even after they'd pulled the plug on her, she had to tell them how to revoke her access. So So what this shows us, worryingly, is that there are a lot of companies still out there who are leaving the power of their social media in the hands of junior staff members, and in this case, a sole member of junior staff. And Poppy actually set up their Twitter account for them while she was working as an intern at HMV, not even a permanent member of staff. So with attitudes around social media like this within the business, I don't think we should be surprised that HMV fell into administration. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted this example from back in October, and this one obviously is very pertinent to me because I work at an exhibitions company, and what the New York Comic Con event managed to do was to tweet on behalf of users without their knowledge. So users had managed to authorise access to their Twitter accounts while activating their RFID badges for the show. Now, obviously, this is never good practice at all. I have never come across a social media user who would be happy for a company to tweet or put Facebook posts on their wall or send messages to their LinkedIn contacts on their behalf. I might just about expect a brand to suggest something that they might like me to share with my social network, but never to actually go and do it on my behalf. And you've got to remember that this Greg guy here, who's been sharing information about what Comic-Con have done and said, you know, hey, NY Comic-Con, I didn't tweet this. What the hell? Your Wi-Fi, your app? It's clear that he didn't know that he was giving over authorization to access his account, and he has 139,000 followers, so he's not exactly your unsavvy social media user. I know that there can be a huge temptation, especially when people are using social APIs to authorize stuff that we might like them to do. And so sometimes those social APIs will tell us that it's okay for us to do that because the user has given us access. But really do avoid doing this, because no matter what the social APIs tell us on the service, I can definitely guarantee that nobody would expect you to actually do this on their behalf. So this was a great example from last week of anybody who was on Twitter during the Brit Awards. So a Telegraph journalist called Tim Walker shared a letter, or an email that he'd received from a PR company working on behalf of MasterCard, which appeared to only guarantee press accreditation to journalists and a ticket to the event if they said positive things about MasterCard and their priceless surprises hashtag. They even went as far as to pre-write example tweets that they might like journalists to share. The type of content that they wanted to see being live tweeted while the journalist was actually at the event. And finally, if that wasn't enough, that any features that were being pushed out on the publication's social feed had to include the @MastercardUK handle and the hashtag priceless surprises. As you can imagine, as a journalist, Tim was less than impressed with being asked to do this. And the story then happened to spread like wildfire across Twitter and the internet as a whole. So these are 3 of my favourite tweets that I happened to pull out based on that. So as you can imagine, this wasn't looking good for MasterCard, and they were forced to issue this statement. We've become aware of this situation and have been clear with our agency in attending media. Attendance at the Brits is not, nor has it ever been, a condition of coverage or endorsement. To imply such is highly inappropriate. And while this throws up some really interesting points around ethics, journalistic integrity, and transparency, it also just goes to show how dangerous it can be if you start to outsource your brand communications, especially to do with social media, to an external agency, and how carefully you actually have to monitor that relationship. I'm always really surprised by the number of PR companies that we have approaching us for shows like this, who offer to bundle our social media in with our traditional PR contract. And you'll then go and look at their website and find that they've got no branded social media accounts of their own, which is obviously a huge red flag, because why would I want a PR agency running my social media when it's quite clear that they don't even run their own? So it's one of those things where, yes, social media campaigns can take up a huge amount of time, but if you are going to use an external agency, you really have to monitor that relationship incredibly closely to make sure that you, unlike MasterCard, don't have to be making these kind of statements. So, British Gas. I feel incredibly sorry for the British Gas team. It must be such a thankless role to have. And this was an example, again, from last year, where on the same day that the company announced that they were having price increases of 10%, they decided to launch a Twitter chat to answer customers' questions about this. So I already feel incredibly sorry for this Bert guy. I think he's in for a really, really rough time. Because you have to bear in mind that if this had been an announcement without a Twitter chat, it still would have set Twitter absolutely ablaze with people saying things like this. But to put fuel on the fire and run a Q&A at the same time is absolutely flabbergasting. Made worse by the fact that not only in the first half of the year had their residential arm posted profits of £356 million, but also that Centrica, the parent company, had promised to keep prices down by using windfall profits to cushion the blow of rising wholesale prices. After the chat, British Gas released this statement. We know people are worried about rising energy prices and they want to talk about this, including on Twitter, and it's important that we're there for them to talk to. That's why we offered a Q&A session with our Customer Services Director. It was the right thing to do because we are committed to being open and transparent with our customers at all times. Now, I've got several problems with this. Not about the open and transparent bit. That I'm very, very happy with. But it's incredibly difficult to be open and transparent about the effect that wholesale gas prices are having on residential prices in 140 characters. Pretty difficult to explain your position in that case. And also for some businesses, it is just generally much harder to be open and transparent, especially when people already don't really like you. I don't know if anybody saw, there was a Horizon programme on last night, which was about how people make decisions. And there was a really interesting, it was about how people there's a battle within us about intuition and logic, and actually people don't really make logical decisions quite a lot of the time, but there was a bit around kind of the cognitive elements that kind of influence these decisions that we're making, and one of them is the halo effect. And if you like somebody or something and they do something that you wouldn't find acceptable in somebody else, you can kind of let that go. The example they used was about Hitler, and actually that he really liked children. He was a great children's advocate, but we find it very uncomfortable to equate him having something good about him when he is kind of the epitome of evil. And in terms of British Gas, it's kind of the same thing. Being open and honest and having, a Twitter chat is a good thing to do. But not if people already don't like you or aren't going to like what you're going to say. You're going to find that very, very difficult. And one of the things that social media does really, really well is highlight where the experiences customers are getting don't live up to expectation. And this is a term coined by Advertising Age writer Jonathan Salin-Baskin, where he talks about Twitter tax, which is the chronic mismatch between what customers expect from brands and what they ultimately get. And it means that the Twitter tax is that things can get very expensive, because all of a sudden you've got all of these digital channels that people can complain by and you have to respond to them. And none of us want to think that our customers' expectations aren't living up to what we're actually providing them. But it happens, and we've got to be open and ready to respond to that. Some of it's going to be good and some of it is going to be bad. But what's really, really important here is that you're able to then feed that information back into the business. So a big question for a lot of us is, how do we turn the engagement that we're getting into ROI? Now, for me, engagement is a very lazy catch-all term, in the same way that kind of community is, and I'm sure I've said community quite a lot today, but engagement is a massively overused buzzword. And what you have to do to understand how engagement is going to equate to ROI in your business is to actually go back a few steps and ask yourself the question, why are we actually here? Because until you can understand what the business values and what the business needs, you're never going to be able to create a social media campaign to address that. So, taking a few steps back, what you need to think about is, what are the overall arching business needs? What are we actually going to be able to term as our metrics of success? And once you understand what the business needs, you can actually create your social media objectives based on that. And then from those objectives, you can create a strategy and campaign that are going to answer them. And then from that, you can understand what your measures of success are. And those are going to be your key engagement metrics. So I'll give you a UBM example. This is our show EcoBuild. It's the biggest sustainability event for the built environment in the world. So next month it will be attracting about 50,000 visitors to Excel over 3 days. And one of our objectives for the show in general is to get lots of lovely visitors like you guys to come down to the show to keep our paying exhibitors happy. And so one of our social media objectives is to understand how to take all of these conversations, which we know are happening about social media and on social media about sustainability in the built environment, and convert those into registrations for the event. Now, we know two really important things about our social media data. First of all, we know that there are lots of people in the Twitter community who are following 2 or more of our speakers and exhibitors. And for us, these are great prospects for registration. The second thing that we know is that where people have pre-registered for an event and they are following 1 or more of our speakers or exhibitors, they have a higher rate of conversion from being a pre-registered visitor to an on-site visitor than those who don't. So this tells us something really important, and it tells us that if we can get our speakers and exhibitors to be talking about us to their communities, then not only do we increase our pre-registration prospects, but we can also increase our on-site conversion rates as well. And that's something that we're able to measure and demonstrate and prove to the business. So that's one aspect of our social media engagement ROI. And it's going to be different for every single business. There isn't kind of a catch-all list of what your engagement metrics should be. So you really do have to take a really close insight and look internally at your business to figure out what the business benefits are, because on social media they differ. They're no different from anywhere else. But one thing that's really, really important about this is you're going to need more than just your brand channel. Because brand channels have this horrible kind of way of acting like owned media rather than driving the earned media that they're supposed to. And it's because it's tricky. You know, unless you are a brand with near ubiquity, something, you know, like Coca-Cola, it can be very difficult to get people to engage with your brand, because generally people like to follow people. They don't necessarily like to follow or engage with brands. And one really overlooked strategy for dealing with this is to engage the people that you work with and to use their networks and their reach to get your message out to a wider audience. Because think about it, rather than having one channel which can talk about your message to an audience, you can have tens or hundreds of thousands of trusted voices, that people-to-people connection rather than brand-to-people, that's going to help spread your message even further. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because I know that lots of companies do fear letting their colleagues loose on social media. But in my opinion, if we're already willing and able and hiring normal human beings that can, you know, answer an email or pick up the phone or go to a client meeting, there's no reason why they shouldn't be engaged in social media either. And there's no escape from this. It's going to become further integrated into businesses. So you've got to find a way to deal with it now and educate the people that you're working with. So one of the really exciting things is that once your brand, you know, the benefits of social media come from when your brand is being social. And that does mean that you need more than your brand, and you actually need your colleagues' buy-in, because then we start to see a really exciting shift from social media towards this concept of social business. And that's where I get really excited anyway. So this is about the idea of collective intelligence. And by collective intelligence, I mean the aggregation of the knowledge, expertise and insight of a diverse group of people. So that could be not just your customers who are sharing insights on social media, but what people internally are sharing with one another, your clients, your agencies, any stakeholder that you happen to work with. Imagine if you could combine all of that insight together and how powerful that could be for your business. So, social media touches literally on everything that we do as a business, and I know that in a lot of companies it traditionally gets lumped in with marketing initially, but we are starting to see it kind of break free from its silo and move more into customer services, sales, marketing and PR, strategy. It can influence everything that we do, and by taking this kind of customer insight, which essentially is what social media is. It's the biggest piece of customer insight that we've actually never commissioned. And combining that with this collective intelligence that we can get from a whole range of stakeholders and sources, we can get really powerful insights into our communities, which allow us to innovate much more quickly. We can be much more agile. We can get instant feedback on products and ideas. We can get a much better idea of how to market to our communities in an effective way. So I'll give you another UBM example. We're starting to take a step towards this. This is the hub. This is our internal social network that we use at UBM. So this is where we can collaborate on global projects, share information with one another, stop kind of reinventing the wheel, find where people have made mistakes or where they might be innovating, ask questions of each other, and generally stay much more in touch and engaged with one another than if we were working in our silos alone. And the next stage for us is to really figure out how to take this internal knowledge and insight that we've got here and connect it with the external picture of our communities that we're building up through the information that they're sharing on social networks. It's not going to be a quick overnight thing, but by bringing those two sides together, by being connected both internally, externally and collaboratively, we can get a much better idea and build a much better picture of how to create targeted promotions, how to create better products and how to innovate much more quickly. Because if that's not competitive advantage, I don't know what is. And for organisations that embrace this next stage of digital disruption, they're going to be the ones that really kind of restructure their internal processes and cultures and structures around openness and transparency, because this is what it's going to require. It is going to feel a little bit uncomfortable because it kind of goes against the grain to be sharing so much of what you're doing with people that could potentially at one time have been your competitors. But this is the way that I see things moving, and this is the way that I believe the future is going to look in terms of social media. But the question I suppose you just have to ask yourself is, are you going to be ready for this? And if you're not already having these internal conversations within your business about how social media and then future social business is going to be disrupting things and influencing the way that you do business, you really should be. Thanks.